Hello and welcome everyone to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. I am your host, Nina Joshi. Have a couple of quick announcements before I bring on our guest for today. We have our January symposium coming up very, very soon to cover the JP Morgan conference, so make sure that you grab your tickets and you attend that event. We also have our HitLab Innovator Summit in person in New York City in May. Tickets for that are also available. You can use the QR code or the link in the chat to attend this incredible event. And with that, would like to formally announce our guest for today, the jack of all trades, Julie Fishman, who has extensive work in biopharma, healthcare, digital health, as a founder, advisor, investor, all of the above. If you have any questions for Julie, please use the Q&A or the chat feature. And if we have time, I will make sure that we get to it. With that, thank you so much for being here today, Julie.
Hi, Nina. It's so great to chat with you today.
I am so excited to just unpack and dive into your incredible wealth of experience, I think, within the broader healthcare space. And maybe, Julie, I think a great place to start for myself and for our audience would be if you could just tell us a little bit more about your career journey.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'm not probably the first one to come onto this podcast and webinar and talk about their career and mention something that's called like all my career has been a bit of a happenstance and
Mhm.
somewhat accidental, and then it's curiosity meets opportunity type of journey. But when I reflect back on my career, I kind of think of it in three phases, three stages. Um, so the first stage of my career was everything around specialty pharmacy. I decided to pursue a degree in pharmacy and trained as a clinician and worked as a pharmacist. So the first, number of years in my career has been spent in that setting. And that's where I got exposure to truly understanding every single stakeholder in healthcare ecosystem because in a specialty pharmacy setting, you have an opportunity to speak to patients who are challenged with dealing pretty complex conditions. You also have a chance to speak to providers and discuss patient care and all the nuances of that care, as well as deal with payers and going around understanding what is the pathway to get the patient the medication that they need. Working with pharma, and because pharma is the manufacturer of those products. So give me this exposure. Also during the time, I went and co-founded the specialty pharmacy. So got an understanding what it's like to run the business and start a company and everything there is to do between the floor and the ceiling of the company. Um, and address all kind of challenges, whether it's human resources challenges or challenges, working through a variety of different situations that come up when you run a business. So that was the first part of my career journey, and then from there, I really became curious what else is out there beyond the setting that I became familiar with. So that was a stage where I got exposed to other stakeholders, had an opportunity to work in biotech. I started working with entrepreneurs and startups. I was an advisor in the early stage accelerator that was offered by an investor, a VC. So got exposure to early stage digital health companies. I became an entrepreneur in residence at UCSD in California. So had an opportunity to work with entrepreneurs, faculty members, postdocs, undergraduate students. Very, very interesting exposure. So always was in the innovation space. And then, the third stage of my career where I am now is doing innovation, working in innovation in corporate and driving that, innovation around new businesses, new technologies, new ways, how do we support patients and address unmet needs. And maybe, one theme that, when people ask me, like, how did you get to where you are? I've always been a systems thinker. So I've always wanted to understand, different components of how something works. And healthcare, there's certainly no shortage of trying to understand how everything works. And another thing, was always curious about innovation. How do we create, how do we new solutions, bring new products to market? Um, how do we build the solutions out? How do we scale them? So that's how I got to where I am now.
That's incredible. I mean, and you said it, Julie, just being able, it's just so evident from you sharing your experiences, kind of having that lens of innovations, of system thinking. And it seems like you have now been able to really view problems with so many different lenses. Just depends on what hat you want to put on, right? Your biopharma hat, your digital health hat.
Yeah,
And I think that's so incredible. And what an incredible perspective that has probably allowed you to bring into your role now.
yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. And I'm so curious, Julie. I think because you have been involved in so many industries that, continue to rapidly expand, biopharma, digital health, the list goes on. How do you kind of see some of these industries, and maybe we can start with biopharma and digital health, but how do you see that kind of intersecting with women's health, or I guess healthcare more broadly? And what are maybe some of those opportunities for just connections between all of these different industries that we're seeing?
Yeah, so maybe if I kind of focus a little bit more on the biopharma side, because there's
Yeah.
certainly no shortage of opportunities where there's a convergence across different parts of the industry and the ecosystem. I think this is not new, but there is an opportunity to see this convergence between digital health, where it complements current therapies on the market, whether it's traditional medications or even going into healthcare. How does it complement and enhance current available approaches to treating different ailments? So I think that's one of the opportunities. I think specifically for pharma, digital health offers an opportunity to enable decentralized clinical trials by remote patient monitoring and utilization of various technologies that capture data. I think that's a really meaningful opportunity. And then I think also I would say AI powered diagnostic tools that can improve disease detection. I think we have really good diagnostic techniques and tools and devices, but I think certainly can supplement it with digital health. I think there's also a lot of opportunities how data and AI can transform care. Digital health tools, wearables allow us to capture real world evidence truly at scale, because everybody has a cell phone. Many people have wearables. Really allows us to understand patient behavior and all the challenges they're dealing with and capture various data points, which should enable us to actually provide those personalized treatments and develop personalized treatment protocols, which something that healthcare industry, pharma industry is driving towards to. And then also being able to use predictive analytics to think about and really model out potential outcomes and how we can improve outcomes. And maybe if I think about the future, somewhat near-term future, I think there is an opportunity to integrate digital biomarkers with traditional diagnostics. I think that's a really good opportunity. I think the hybrid care models, which already exist, will hopefully become truly a standard of care. Digital supplementing the traditional approaches to providing care. And this is something a very common conversation in pharma is utilization of AI technologies for drug development, especially in women's health, where we have shortage of data.
Right. That's so fascinating. I definitely agree. I think when we think about like a hybrid model, as horrible as the pandemic was, it did allow for rapid adoption of technology. So I think exactly to your point, I think everyone, not only has a cell phone, but I feels like are so familiar with what it means to do life virtually. So it's how do we like kind of, take that momentum and just continue to bring it forward. And some of the outlines and what you were speaking to was honestly making me very excited. It seems like there's a lot of great innovation that's hopefully looks like in development or in the pipeline.
Yes, yes.
I
We just have to
love
move it
that.
forward.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I want to dive into your thoughts on, I think, like the data and the AI piece a little bit, but I think before we get into all of that fun stuff, I wanted to ask you, because you've also been an entrepreneur and resident and as and a founder yourself, you also have this, really great experience of what it means to be kind of on the ground floor in innovation, very, very early stages. I'm so curious, and maybe for some of the founders that are listening in today, what do you see, I think, being a founder yourself, but now also existing in a broader ecosystem? What are some of the more pressing challenges right now in not only developing but commercializing, women's health or healthcare solutions today? What's kind of
Yeah.
top of mind for you?
Yeah, I think, and I already kind of alluded to this, but a huge challenge is we have such limited sex-specific data in clinical research when it comes to women's health. And that's the foundation, right? We need to have data in order to really develop solutions that address unmet market needs.
Mhm.
And once we have that, and even now, before we truly have this data, I think and I'm not the first one to say it, there is obviously insufficient funding for women's health. It's we definitely see improvement now with funding going towards women's health research. Government funding hopefully will continue and grow over time. But the amount of funding that's going into women's founded companies, still so
Yes.
small, so small. So that's, those are some of the couple of areas. And I think this last area that I'm going to talk about is, it's not just for women's health. It's kind of across all innovative solutions and digital health solutions. And these are access barriers. So digital literacy gaps, right? We talk about that, yes, everybody has a cell phone, but like really utilize all the digital technology. We still have significant gaps. And, who's wearing all the wearables? It's those of us fortunate enough to live very comfortably. But, there's this vast populations out there that don't have access to technology. I think the other side of it is the healthcare provider adoption. Healthcare providers don't have enough education, around how do they incorporate data and digital health into the workflows? How does that empower and power up their decision making and guides their decision? There are certainly institutions at the forefront of incorporating this information in treatment protocols, but not across the board.
Yeah.
Specific to women's health, audience probably heard it from other speakers. So very little training is provided to physicians during medical school training on issues really specific to women's health, like topics like menopause and all the other conditions. And lastly, it's of course, the insurance coverage for novel solutions and
Yeah.
business models. Because if we don't have coverage, it's fantastic that we have a solutions, but very few people can pay for healthcare out of pocket. And we have to figure out how do we create coverage for the solutions to drive adoption.
100%. Wow, Julie, that was an incredible framework that you really laid out for us. That kind of speaks to, I think, really just the current state and maybe some of the considerations for folks that are kind of in R&D that are founders. And I think on that note too, for commercializing a health product, when thinking about creating something that is meaningful, that is scalable, what are some of the more, critical first steps that early stage founders or folks in pharma should really kind of have at at the forefront?
Yeah, yeah. So I think like specifically at early stages, what I think about is truly making sure that you validate the problem that you're
Mm,
solving for. Um, a lot of times when I've met, not just women founders, not just those women who are working on digital health solutions, but founders across the board, a lot of times it's driven by a personal need or, a personal problem or, a problem that a loved one had. Um, and I'll just digress for a second and say, very recently I was reading a book on management, and it was giving us advice to early career professionals, and it said, don't go after your passion. Go after solving a big problem. And that's what's going to be
Oh,
meaningful, which kind of like took me a little bit by surprise because, we always say like follow your passion. But I think that's the opportunity actually in women's health. It's the convergence of passion and a big problem. But
I
you
love
have to validate it. You have
right.
to really validate it that the problem that you're having, is a problem that's actually impacting, others and big population, and it's something that really needs to be solving. So you need to validate that problem. How do you do that? Engage with patients. Even if it's on a small scale, if you can speak to other individuals and talk to them, whether it's friends and family or beyond, you have to be really kind of creative at the early stages, but talk to patients, really understand what are their needs. Make sure you also get a hold of some healthcare providers and have conversations with them. How are they viewing the problem? Do they see it as a problem? Do they see the solution that you're bringing to market as something that they're curious about and see as a value add for their practice? And then if you can get a hold of some data, and there are sources of data like Kaiser Family Foundation and, other sources, open sources of data that can give you some insight into the problem and the solution that you're bringing. I think the other side of it is you need to think about the market framework, the opportunity framework. You need to think about what is the addressable market, what is that market size, and be really, really clear, really good, dive into the details. What is your market? Who are you solving it for? Is it every single person who has a cell phone? Probably not. So really we need to understand it. Validate that the solution solves the actual problem. And also very important to think about what is the competitive differentiation of your solution? How is it different from everything else? And one important thing to really consider is status quo. Because changing people's behavior, even when they think they have a problem, it's not easy. So really need to think about that your solution is different from everything else that's available in the market. And you have to think about the business model. Because when it comes to healthcare, we have existing frameworks where there is an opportunity to get reimbursement one way or another for for different businesses and different business models. Can you think about the way how the opportunity, the business, the solution that you're bringing to market, can it fit into the existing business model so you can very quickly, once you develop a solution, bring it into market and the providers and patients can easily incorporate it. And that's really, really important. And I think, really need to think about how do you engage your key stakeholders? Can you connect to patient advocacy groups and talk to them? Because a lot of times they're the ones who have a lot of information about the challenges of patients. They actually may have those patient groups that you may be able to get access to and interview and get that early validation. Can you connect to the clinical thought leaders, to KOLs, and discuss with them and get their feedback on your solution? And then, of course, payers, because I keep mentioning that we need to make sure that, the solution you bring it to market has an opportunity to be able to fit into the existing reimbursement structure or has some future potential. With digital health, with digital therapeutics, we've run into a lot of challenges. I think there are some viable opportunities that are becoming available through new regulation, through new legislature, but it's still too challenging to adopt it at scale.
100%. And I'm so glad that you really kind of outlined all of these various components, and it is kind of all these different cogs in the machine, because I feel like in some ways healthcare is so rigid, but in other ways, like with digital health and some of these new innovations, the lines are still so blurry. So you kind of have to do both a little well, which is challenging, but I think also very rewarding too. So I appreciate you taking the time to just walk us all collectively through just some of the considerations that I think are so important.
Yeah, yeah.
You had mentioned something, Julie, that I thought was really interesting around, really the scientific validation and the problem validation. Is this the right problem to tackle, the right solution for the problem? But you had said something around like the market and like the market timing aspect of it too. So I'm so curious, how do you kind of balance both of those? How do you have to kind of consider not just the validity, but also just the broader market forces that are at play too?
Yeah, yeah. So you have to be very clear around what is that minimum viable evidence that you need, that will show that your solution is a viable solution in the market. Can you
Mhm.
think about your initial pilot studies? What are you going to measure? How are you going to conduct them? What is your, first population size? Is it 20 people? Is it 100 people? Is that meaningful enough, to show that the impact of your solution? What type of real world evidence are you going to be collecting in those initial studies? And, to be thinking about the regulatory pathway. How does that fit in, together with your initial pilots and gathering those evidentiary requirements? I think it's also important to think about how will you build credibility with your solution. Some startups, or other types of organizations who are building out early stage solutions, they have more extensive resources, so they can think about how will they bring publications to market. But if not, then can you gather some patient testimonials, the early stages that will speak to the impact of your solution? Can you form an advisory board, from clinicians or those in the ecosystem who are imperative to commercializing your solution? So I think that needs to be considered, to building that credibility. And also, I think it's also very, very important to think about what are the success metrics, at different stages of developing your solution. So could it be, is it clinical outcomes data? Is it clinical outcomes data only, or are there other metrics that are important? Like, for example, user engagement and metrics. Because when you think about, when you're planning out your solution and what is the financial potential? What is the potential of the revenue for the solution? You need to validate, and you need to ground your projections in actual data. So if you have an early stage pilot and you offering it to, let's say, 100 people, what are you going to see in that pilot? How many people are actually going to adopt that solution? How many will use it actively? And how long will that use it for? All that information is very valuable. And from provider perspective too, if you're partnering, for example, with 10 providers, you have to really think about how many of them are becoming sort of like super adopters and recommending your solution to everyone, how many are not. So these are all these various success metrics that you have to think about.
That is incredible. Thank you so much, Julian. You just said something that I thought was really interesting around kind of the role of, I guess, like partnerships, right? You had mentioned it kind of with physicians, but also patient advisory groups, all of these other ways to kind of have strategic partnerships or relationships. Can you touch a little bit more, I think, on that, and maybe how founders should approach
Yeah.
strategic partnerships?
Yeah, so have to be very clear around where you are in your journey. At early stage, you need to think about one type of partnerships versus later stage. So in early stage, who are your technology development partners? Who is going to help you actually, build the technology? Who are going to be your research institutions and clinical validation partners that are going to help you sort of gather those evidentiary requirements at early stages. So that's important in the beginning. And as you advance with your solution for later stage, if you're not commercializing the solution yourselves, who are going to help? Who is going to help you commercialize your solution and distribute it? Is it going to be payer organizations? Is it going to be healthcare provider organizations? Are these healthcare systems that are going to be able to help you? So those are some of those that will be important to consider at a later stage. I think it's
Mhm.
also really important to think early on about the success metrics about when it comes to partnerships. You have to align with your partners on the milestones that you're going to achieve. What are the patient impact metrics that are important to you and to your partner? That's
Definitely.
important. And maybe I'll just kind of like briefly mention a couple of common pitfalls that I've seen when it comes to partnerships. A lot of times people think and founders think very short term. What are we going to do in the first year or first 3 months? You really have to think about with a long-term horizon and have conversations around topics like this is what we're doing now in this initial period. What is our partnership is going to be later if we demonstrate KPIs that we aligned on. And then, also being very, very careful to rely too much on your partners because nobody's going to
Mm,
know your solution or be passionate about your solution as you are.
yes.
So you have to think about that.
I love that. I realized really that we're close on time, so wanted to kind of ask you one last question, which I think is one of my favorite questions, which is if do you have any just words of wisdom, any career advice for just to share with us? Maybe anything that a mentor or something you read that just really resonated with you to kind of share with the group.
Yeah, I think I think you have to be curious. You have to be very, very curious, and that curiosity never has to stop. You have to be
Mhm.
curious about, the solution. You have to be curious about patients. You have to be curious about every stakeholder in the ecosystem, and then you have to be resilient. And you have to surrender yourself with so many different people. Some of them are going to encourage you. Some of them are going to challenge you, but
Mm.
the ecosystem is super important.
I love that. Curiosity and resiliency, two very, very important things. Thank you so much, Julie, for taking the time just to share all of this incredible insight and just discussion with us. I found it so incredibly helpful, and I'm sure so many of our participants did as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to stop by.
Sure, happy to.
Thank you, Julie. Make sure you join us next week for our next Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. Wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsors for sponsoring this conversation, as well as one last huge shout out to Julie for her incredible insights. Her LinkedIn is available in the chat if you want to connect with her further. And we'll see you all next Wednesday. Bye, everyone.